All right, good afternoon or good evening, I guess. Hope you guys are doing well. It's been a while since I've actually made videos, and I'm actually running out of my queue, surprisingly enough, so I gotta start making some videos pretty soon. Just wanted to share something with you that I have been processing, not just from an OP standpoint, but also just in terms of my personal life. Recently, I've been really thinking about the nature of like why we socially connect with each other. Obviously, with the DE, that's probably a high priority for me, especially given that a lot of communication is really ineffective, right? A lot of things get lost in translation. There are a lot of assumptions that people make that aren't there, in reality. People project onto each other all the time and project onto reality. So, one person's understanding of what happened is very different from another person's understanding. And then also from just, frankly, an OP type perspective, we filter a lot of things through our type. So, there might be something, for example, that someone in the beta quadra will tell me, and I'll filter it through the delta lens that I have, right? So, for me, one thing that I've been kind of thinking about recently is, okay, well, if there's all of these things that get lost in translation when we communicate, then what's the point of communicating at all? Like, it's like, why bother talking if 80 to 99% of what you're saying is totally misinterpreted by your audience, right? And for me, kind of the conclusion that I made, and granted, I'm going to use a lot of, maybe this might be woo-woo wording. I don't have the right words for it. But for me, it's like, I think the realization is a lot of why I socialize or try and interact with people, and a lot of why I try and communicate my points of view, isn't necessarily because I want my perspective to be perfect, or perfectly understood, as much as I think I kind of argue in favor of that. I think at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is trying to have what I would call a soul to soul connection with other people, as well as to have a connection with my own soul, right? And so the reason I bring this up is one thing that I'm noticing, and I think maybe worth exploring, is that I believe this realization of mine that the information doesn't, I mean, the communicating information is not the highest priority in a social interaction. I think this is something that energy dominants understand, especially due to them having play and sleep in the top three. Play being defined as, chaotically connecting with the tribe or gathering new information with the tribe, and sleep being, reviewing known information about yourself, but ultimately also connecting with yourself. And so for me, with I definitely have info-dommed the way that energy doms prefer socializing. And one thing that they've told me quite often is that they usually don't communicate that much. In fact, they hate prolonged conversations like this. Instead, what they'll do is they will organically bring people that they vibe with into what they call their play sleep. I think they called it the play sleep cycle or the play sleep, exchange, right? So instead of having a long conversation, it's like, hey, you want to go on a trip with me? Hey, do you want to kind of hang out while I'm doing my nails or my makeup? I think some people have given me examples of that, right? So it's more of an unspoken bond is kind of the way that I've really kind of seen energy doms described. And then in contrast, much like what I'm doing right now, hopefully I'm not just doing this, but with the infodoms, there's this, I would call it this detached observation or this detached point of view where what's being discussed, even though there is ultimately a personal connection and maybe even a soul to soul connection that they want, it's framed in a way where it's very detached and where it's very impersonal, right? So a lot of infodoms, what they specialize in, whether they're play last or sleep last, is they're very good at reporting, hey, here's what happened, here's the situation, right? Like much like a news reporter. So for example, I think there's actually a type twin of mine who is on CNN. I forgot her. I think her name is Rachel Maddow, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And although she's very passionate about what she's talking about, she will share her point of view, which I think is, very admirable of her. She specializes in taking a step back and saying, hey, here's what's going on. Another great example is Phil DeFranco. He's like, hey, I do have my point of view, but let me just share with you objectively or from a detached point of view what's happening. And I don't want to bring myself into the discussion, and I don't want to force myself to connect with you on the discussion, right? Now, I think what this leads to is a lot of, I want to say, just misunderstandings, and a lot of really hurt feelings, and just, poor interactions, right? I know for myself, especially being infodom, and especially sleep last, one thing that I struggle with is I'll jump into a conversation, or I'll have a prolonged conversation. I'll rant passionately about a subject. Yes, I'm connected to it, but I'll rant about it in a detached way. And I think what that ends up doing is I may mention things, or I may say things that hurts the other person, and yet I don't necessarily notice it because I'm not paying attention to how much, let's say, again, this is the wording I have, how much of their soul is invested in that topic, right? So, for example, I think recently, I think I was having a discussion with some people about, Roe versus Wade. I don't know about it, right? So it's like, demon sensory. I was just looking into it, and one thing that I had to just be careful of, in, now I'm paying attention to it, is I'm like, hey, I don't want to get into that infodom mode where I'm just, coldly analyzing. I think the TENT, impacts it as well, but just coldly analyzing what's happening, especially because it does directly affect, the people that I was interacting with, especially the women that I was interacting with. So, now in contrast, I think with the energy doms, I don't know if you guys are in the class, but the Celine Dion class, part 2 especially, really emphasized that, is there's such an immersion in this, I don't know how to word it, the soul to soul experience, that is the only concern they have. And so when things kind of shake them within their experience, that really immersed experience of the world, they get lost, right? So a great example in the class, not only from Celine but from Dave and Shan, who are also energy dom, is there's this section of Celine. So Celine Dion was processing the death of her husband, if I'm not mistaken, which is obviously, that's going to be painful, and will affect everyone, at least if you had a marriage that you enjoyed, right? And one thing that she kind of concluded and was processing was, well, my connection with Renee really guided me, especially with the blast last. He guided me, and I had this trust in him to take care of really the blast and the OI. And now, for her, she's like, okay, I'm trying to process this reality of, one, how do I live in this world without that connection really to the blast or to the OI? How do I navigate through? And then secondly, and this is the more positive conclusion she came to, she's like, okay, well, I need to really, I think the way she said, bare her soul or share her soul with the audience, right? And, so again, I mean, that kind of directly correlates with what I'm talking about. But one thing I noticed with Dave and Shan is, yes, they were trying to correlate it with FI, and I think they were trying to correlate it with some other things. But what I found interesting was that they didn't question the fact that, Celine Dion was talking about this soul to soul connection, right? And then I think on top of that, I think even in some of the comments throughout the class, it was probably more so Shan, but she was kind of processing and kind of sharing, okay, this is really empowering for other people who are going through similar experiences, and this is something that I think you should pay attention to and connect with on at least an FI emotional level, right? And I think what's taken for granted is that not everyone, at least for me, not everyone, like, quite frankly, cares or concerns themselves with that soul to soul connection. They would much rather, especially for infodoms, they would much rather get the information in a very detached format. Like, what are the parts? How, like, where can I see the parts in Celine, for example? I don't necessarily want to hear about, like, her struggles, although they're, they have to do with her. It would be more of a detached, okay, how do I understand either the system or whatever you're trying to explain? And it misses that soul to soul connection by trying to be that detached and objective. So anyway, this is something I'm processing. I do believe that there is a time and place for everything. The way I would describe it is, I think that at the end of the day, the energy doms are prioritizing the right things. I do think at the end of the day, especially, given how limited life is and how limited time is, it's more important to really make the most of your experience on this earth, and that would include not only having a deep connection with the people around you, but also a deep connection with yourself, right? And there's no detached and objective way to have that. Like, you have to live within your life while you still have it, and I think that's important. I think where the infodom's perspective, let's say, is valuable, that detached perspective is once. So, for example, with Celine, it's like Celine having that issue with, okay, I lost my personal soul connection with the blaster in my life. Now what do I do? Where the infodom can be valuable is take a detached point of view and be like, hey, okay, yes, this happened, but this is objectively the way you would go about it, right? Almost like getting like a Google answer or a Google solution to a problem, right? Where it's like Google's very detached. This is an analogy, but Google's very detached about your personal issue. It's like okay, I'm just answering the question as you gave it to me, with the hope that by using that objective information, you can then have a better experience of life. But like I said, sometimes that may manifest, or sometimes that may rub people the wrong way because it's so insensitive. Maybe is the right word, right? So anyway, so that's my little rant. This is something I have been thinking about for the past few weeks. I haven't quite shared it, but I think with the Celine class, just seeing how they were describing it and seeing the second part in particular, I was like, okay, this is probably a good time to mention this. If you have any feedback, feel free to let me know. I'm open to being wrong about this. I think I'm on track though. I know I haven't been making videos in a while, but I hopefully will make some, hopefully either tonight or as soon as humanly possible. But hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys at least got something out of this. And looking forward to seeing you in the next video that I make. Take care.